My name is David DeYoung, and I'm currently at the National Optical Astronomy Observatory in Tucson. And I think the first summer we came to Aspen was in 1972, when there was an astrophysics workshop programmed for that summer that I believe I first heard about it from George Field. And there's a little bit more history there that I'll go into in a minute about astrophysics at Aspen. But 72 was the first year we were here, and I was just struck, smitten by this place when I first arrived, and perhaps discuss a little bit more about background later on about that, but it was wonderful. It was physics, it was mountains, it was music, it was everything I could ask for. So that really got my interest in Aspen raised to a very high level. And at that time, astrophysics in Aspen was a very small part of the program. There had been a few meetings before that in the summer, but at that time it was mostly condensed matter and particle physics. In fact, that was it. And we were told when we wanted to organize an astrophysics workshop here that yes, you could come, but you have to come in the off season. So, and the only time you can come in the off season is the very first, when the Physics Center was open. So early June. And so we were kind of relegated to early June as the only time that we could get in. In those early days, in the early 70s, George Field and Bill Saslaw and I put together a series of little proposals to NASA to try to get some money for just a 2 or 3 week workshop in astrophysics at Aspen. And we were, after some time, successful at getting those after, I think, after the second or perhaps the third year. But every summer, the astrophysics people would get together and they would try to decide on a topic for next summer in hopes that we would be able to make that fly. And that went on for a number of years. That was the format. And we would get annual funding year by year from NASA, and we wouldn't find out often until the last minute whether or not the funding was available. But we managed to get a few $1,000s every summer from NASA for a summer workshop here. And so we sort of wormed our way into the program by taking what time was available and bringing money. And that seemed to be a formula that worked. And so actually astrophysics became more and more established at the center as time went on. But those early years were very exciting and a lot of fun. It was a new venue. We kind of collectively decided on what the topic would be from year to year. And then we convinced some numbers of our colleagues to organize the workshop. And it was all a very collective and very freewheeling kind of endeavor. It was very productive. I got a lot of science done in those years, and a lot of collaborations were established. Bill Saslaw was one, of course. He was involved in the early years. George Field, Sterling, Susan Lee was another person who was at Berkeley at the time and is now at San Francisco State, I believe. I'd have to think back. There were 3 or 4 people that I worked with that were part of the astrophysics group here. Craig Wheeler, who's still here. Some of those other early, Don Melrose came a few times.
What topics were current then?
Well, there was a lot of activity about pulsars at that time, and supernovae, and these are still, supernovae of course are still very relevant in a different sense. My interest was, and still is, largely in active galactic nuclei and these gigantic explosions that take place in the nuclei of galaxies. And 30 some odd years later, we still don't really understand what's going on, but we understand more. There's a lot more still to go. One of the things that I found very useful here in the later years of coming to Aspen was it permitted me time to work on a book, which I finished in 2004, I guess, on the physics of extragalactic radio sources. There's a copy of it here in the library, actually. So that was a very useful time to just get away and be able to write for a couple of years prior to its publication. But so there's this thread that's been kind of continuity in what I've been doing here in the summer times, which has revolved around the nature of these active nuclei in galaxies and how they evolve with cosmic time, how they evolve as a function of their environment, rich clusters of galaxies versus poor groups, what makes them go, presumably a black hole, but that's not enough. That's necessary, but not sufficient. So a lot more goes on there. So it's still an unfolding issue and still a lot of fun. My involvement in the governance of the center began fairly early on. In 1970, I think it was 3 or 4, I was made a trustee of the Physics Center, and those were in the days when there were only trustees. There weren't these two classes of active members, the general members and the trustees. And as you probably recall, we reformulated our governance structure in later years to have general members and trustees. But at that time, there were only trustees, and those were the people who looked after the running of the center. And I remember Randy Durand came to my office one day while I was here and asked if I would be interested in being involved with the operations of the center, and I immediately said yes, because I was very enthusiastic. And so I do remember some highlights of those early trustees meetings with Robert O. Anderson holding forth on the virtues of drip irrigation, among other things, as well as governance of our organization, the struggle we had to get our own land, free and clear, issues of ditch rights, all kinds of things which have long been settled, were put before us then, at that time. So there was that period of about 5 years when I was a trustee, and then I rotated off, but I was still active in various committees in the center. I think I've been on almost all the committees at the center and chaired a number of them. And I was on the executive committee and the nominating committee and buildings and grounds and summer program and winter program and, the usual kind of list of things that go on around here. And then in 2001, I was asked to serve as president of the center. And I served from 2001 to 2004. And that, of course, brings everything together, all of the bits and pieces you've been seeing about how the center runs over the years, and from the view of committee members or chairs, suddenly coalesces into the overall grand picture. And I think my going in thought when I first became president was some version of the Hippocratic Oath, which was above all else, do no harm, okay? And that's the one thing I was determined was to preserve, above all else, the virtues already extant in the center. There were a number of issues that came up those 3 years. I think one of the major themes that I sort of encouraged was an examination of the breadth of our program and whether we should expand just beyond the 3 traditional roles of particle physics, condensed matter physics, and astrophysics. And I was certainly very much in favor of the emerging initiatives in biophysics. I thought that was very interesting, and possibly looking into some other possible venues where we might take part in research. Another aspect of that, reaching out, and this is just a reflection of my own personal philosophy, is that I felt that physics should not necessarily be too secular, because it's a part of the culture, it's a part of human endeavor. And so we established a stronger liaison with the Aspen Institute that we'd ever had before. And this culminated in a joint venture between the Physics Center and the Aspen Institute, which was called an Einstein Celebration, I believe, and that took place in 2004, right, I think that's right. It was a big production, as the Aspen Institute programs tend to be, with a lot of work and a lot of people, but there was a lot of participation from the Physics Center in that. Different people have differing views on how broad or how narrow our focus should be. Since that time, we have contracted somewhat in our interaction with the Institute, and that's fine as well, I think. But I thought it was a very interesting experience for people at the Physics Center and at the Institute, because neither of us knew what the other really was doing. And we at least got a better picture of that. And there have been since then some additional initiatives in energy, for example, and other things from time to time that are a little outside the strict research in condensed matter, particle physics, and astrophysics. I happen to think that that's a good thing to do at some level. Well, you don't want it to draw away from the main program. So there was that topic of broadening the program, or at least looking to see if we should. The whole issue of long-range planning came up during my administration. I established a long-range planning committee that didn't exist before. We looked at things such as the length of stay issue, which at that time was becoming an item of concern. Many people were only staying for 2 weeks. and we were thinking about lots of different ways to try and encourage longer stays. I think that has changed now. People are staying longer. We looked at diversity. I mean, Liz Simmons had been doing a wonderful job there, and we wanted to encourage more of that, to broaden it not only to more participation on the part of women physicists, but to other ethnic groups as well. And so that was an area of interest which I like to pursue. In terms of our funding and our finances, I think, improved relationships with the National Science Foundation. I made a couple of trips back to Washington to talk with the NSF folks in the Division of Grants and Awards to try and straighten out their view of us. They didn't really understand what we were because we were a unique entity in the NSF's landscape, nothing quite like us. And then the Division of Grants and Awards made a site visit here in 2002 or 3, which I think went fairly well. It was education for both sides, and so I think that improved our relationships with the NSF a lot. I managed to get a $30,000 grant from NASA for 3 years for the summer astrophysics program, which was nice. It was about 3 times much more per year than we had gotten from NASA before. And so that was useful, and as well as a $10,000 grant from Argonne to help with our summer program. So the funding issues got a little bit better at that time, and that was good. Since then, NASA has retracted some of their activities, and I'm going to try to help see if I can reignite that effort, but we will see. What else? Well, let's see. Also, that was a time also when the library was converting over to electronic holdings, and there was lots of discussion, as you can imagine, about what we should do and whether we should get electronic subscriptions only, or how would we make paper available if people want paper copies. And I think all those got solved. I think it's working well and has for some time, but that was an interesting transition at that time. Let's see. Well, there was the 40th anniversary celebration, which you, Bernice, helped organize, and I recall we were in the parade on the 4th of July. We had a special session here for the 40th anniversary and an ice cream social, I think, or something like that. That was lots of fun. Those are some of the things that come to mind about what was going on when I was president. Computing was also an issue. We were transitioning from the free links we got from Aspen SmallWorks to a paid-for, supported broadband link, which we now have, so the whole transition to the electronic age was kind of occurring during those years, and that seems to have been a success so far as well. Obviously, I didn't do all this myself when I was president. I had lots of help from lots of people. One of the people I leaned on most for advice, consultation, and general support was Tom Applequist, who was the chairman of the board at that time. And Tom and I had many discussions over policy issues and formulating things and just general sounding board. I leaned heavily on Jane Kelly because Jane knows everything, knows everyone. She's a great source not only of information but a font of wisdom as well. And she always had just the right perspective to give me when I was having problems with issues or people or what have you. I would often talk to Jane and get her take on things, which was always useful. Other names that come to mind, Craig Wheeler was a very useful person to have to talk to. As far as the library is concerned, Karen Rabe was instrumental in seeing all of this transition from paper to electronic. A lot of people I have a hard time. Howie Haber was extremely involved all along. And yes, there were the DeWolfs, Maggie and Nick. Nick in particular was a real supporter of the Physics Center. Totally enthusiastic and very useful, very helpful. Gave us good advice and just a force in the community, if you will, to help us out. Marty Flug also was great support from the community. Through his involvement with music, but also his deep interest in the center, gave us this community link with other activities in Aspen, as well as an intrinsic interest in the center. And Marty's helped the center a great deal over the years and continues to be a real source of support for us. I'm leaving many, many people out. If I had a list of names in front of me, I could go through and point them out for you. But more will probably occur to me as we progress. One of the reasons I was so struck the first time I came to Aspen was that both my wife and I are natives of Colorado. We were born and raised in Colorado Springs. And we were living at Charlottesville, Virginia at the time, and which is pretty far removed from the West, culturally and geographically and climatologically. So when we got to Aspen, we were actually sort of coming home in a way. And there's this wonderful resonance with the mountains and being back in the mountains. And then there was the music festival. And so it was this magical combination of physics and music and mountains that seemed to just have everything. And of course, our children were young then. My daughter and our daughter and son were with us many of those summers, and I can remember them floating boats in the ditches, just as our grandchildren did this summer. And so it's a long history there, but it's always been kind of a summer home for us in a way, both in terms of where we were from, and those roots go very deep, as well as just the wonderful intellectual and spiritual stimulation that this place offers. So it's been a real force in our lives, I think, over the last several decades, and it's been a wonderful influence for all of us. Of course, in addition to Colorado being our roots, coming back every summer in Aspen meant that we developed many long-lasting friendships here, in addition. And I can name just a lot of people, the Durans, the Colgates, the Blocks, the Pines. I can name a number of different physicists from all around the country that we've seen here, and at one point had shared babysitters or this sort of thing with. So this recurring revisiting of friends every year, as well as coming back to the physics and the mountain and the music, was a very important part of this growing and deepening of the roots in Aspen. And so that's been very important as well. I could also mention, I think I forgot to mention, that I was on the Board of Trustees for a second term, which was from 1991 to 2001. I think it was during that time that we decided to build, after a lot of discussion, the new building. And I was on the building committee. Bill Frazer was the chair, and I think I was the vice chair of that committee. And we worked many long hours with Harry Teague, the architect, putting together trial drawings and trying this out and trying that out, and working within costs. And I still have rolls of blueprints from the drawings from that effort. And it was a wonderful experience as well, because just to see this thing take shape, and also the way the members of the Physics Center responded to our fundraising drive for this new building was really just a heartwarming experience to see how people just sort of thought this was part of their life and they were going to contribute to it, and they did. And so we had this very successful fundraising campaign as well. And David Schramm, of course, I should have mentioned David also earlier, was part of that fundraising campaign, the New Century campaign it was called. And that was very successful. David was very adept at those kinds of activities. He was very good at that. He and I were good friends. We were both pilots, and so when Dave was up here in the summertime, he and I would go flying, which was always just enormously good fun. And we took Dave's airplane, and I paid for the fuel, and that was the arrangement. And so we flew to Telluride or to wherever, and that was a lot of fun. Michael Turner always used to make fun of us, saying that that was our narcotic, but in a way it was. So Dave was very good friend. So that was how the new building effort kind of took place in terms of my contribution. Bill Frazer was the major driver on that, but it was a lot of fun and a lot of very interesting to help out with that project as well.